The movie opens with an electrifying scene of the legendary actress Marilyn Monroe. We see her surrounded by flashing lights and cameras, and she smiles at all of them. Then we flash back to 1933 in Los Angeles, where a young Marilyn, whose real name is Norma Jean, is sitting in a car with her mom Gladys. As they head home, Gladys reveals that there's a surprise waiting for her on her 7th birthday. Upon their arrival, Gladys shows Norma a photograph of a man and reveals that he is her father. She explains that he was far away when Norma was born, and due to many obligations, he can't be with them right now. She asks Norma to keep this a secret, warning that it could create problems if she tells anyone. Curious about this reasoning, Norma asks where he is now, but her mother fails to answer her question. Later on, a drunk Gladys prepares to light the candles for Norma's birthday. After blowing out the candles, Norma looks at a photo of her father and imagines him telling her he loves her and will come back into her life someday. Around midnight, Gladys wakes Norma up and puts her in the car. They drive out of the city and Norma sees her whole neighborhood on fire. Ignoring advice from others, Gladys heads towards the Hollywood Hills where the fire started. Not long after, a police officer stops them and advises Gladys to return home, away from the approaching fire. Gladys explains that they've received an invitation to a fireproof mansion in the upscale part of town. She hesitates to reveal the owner's name, but mentions he's a significant figure and Norma's father. However, the officer demands they turn around and threatens to arrest her if she doesn't comply. Reluctantly, Gladys turns the car around, and a confused Norma asks why her father hasn't visited her if he's been around all this time. However, her intoxicated mother gets angry and lands a few uppercut shots. Upon their return home, Gladys undresses herself and does the same to Norma. She prepares a bath, but makes the water burning hot. Norma pleads and cries that it's too hot, but her mother forces her into the boiling water and tries to drown her. However, moments later, Gladys suddenly regrets her actions and releases Norma. She then begins to shout, blaming Norma for the rejection by her lover. She believes that if Norma had never been born, her lover would surely have married her. Terrified, Norma rushes out and frantically knocks at her neighbor's doors, seeking help for her mother. A kind woman named Miss Flynn opens her door and takes Norma in. She then notices Gladys still naked, who quickly closes the door to her own home. Miss Flynn then comforts Norma, assuring her that she'll be safe there. A few days later, Miss Flynn informs Norma that her mother's now stable and she can visit her in hospital. Overjoyed by the news, Norma eagerly packs a suitcase to leave. However, a while later, Norma realizes they're not going to the hospital, but have arrived at an orphanage. Miss Flynn, with a heavy heart, pleads for Norma's forgiveness while explaining that there's no other option because her mother's very abusive and unstable. Norma starts crying and insists she's not an orphan since her parents are still alive. Despite her protests, Miss Flynn eventually leads her inside the orphanage. The scene then shifts to the early 1940s, where Norma's grown up into a beautiful woman. She's working as a model for magazines and calendars while diligently attending acting classes. During this time, she adopts the name Marilyn Monroe and secures a meeting with a producer of a major studio. There, she tries to read her script, but the man stops her and ends up taking advantage of her. After this incident, she eventually lands her first acting role without the need for auditions. From there, her career takes off, and she soon becomes a celebrated and iconic figure in the world of entertainment. One day, Norma goes to visit her mother at the mental facility, though they haven't seen each other in over a decade. Upon seeing her, Norma gets very emotional and hugs her with tears, while Gladys remains unresponsive. Afterward, Norma tells her that she makes a living as a model and proudly shows her mother the photos and magazines featuring her. She recalls Gladys saying that her father used to work in the studio around 1925, so she looked into him but found nothing. But suddenly, Gladys screams at her, asking who she really is, and claims she's waiting for her real daughter. In the year 1952, Norma befriends two renowned actors, Cass Chaplin and Eddie Robinson, both of whom are the sons of famous fathers. During a piano playing session, we see Cass dancing with Norma while Edward continues to play. The scene then shifts to a bedroom, where Cass and Edward strip in front of Norma while talking about how they've done adult films. They admire Norma's body and discuss how their bodies aren't supposed to be hidden, but rather to be celebrated. Cass briefly complains about how his father, Charlie Chaplin's fame, has overshadowed his own identity. He shares that he found his true self when he looked into the mirror and urges Norma to do the same to discover her own identity. After this, the three of them sleep together and begin a relationship. During a movie premiere, we see Cass and Eddie pleasuring Norma in a theater. The tabloids catch wind of their three-way relationship, making it front-page news. Therefore, Norma's agent advises her to keep her distance from Cass and Eddie in public and to be discreet during private moments. Norma tries to convince them that it isn't fair because she genuinely loves them. However, her agent warns that having two lovers could negatively impact her career. After a few days, Norma discovers that she's pregnant and gets very excited. She tells her doctor that she wants to keep the baby and rushes to meet Cass and Eddie. They meet in a restaurant where Norma tells them the good news. The guys are taken off guard, but realizing that it makes Norma happy, they cherish the moment. The three of them then decide to spend the night having fun. Along the way, they come across a massive cutout of Norma, and they stop to celebrate her. The following day, Norma calls her agent and informs them that she'll be unable to work on her next film. Her agent's shocked by this confession and asks why, but she doesn't provide a clear reason. Later, as Norma bathes her mother, she asks her if she'd like to be a grandmother, but her mother seems uninterested. Norma reminisces about how Gladys had a baby without being married and commends her for the courage to keep her. She thanks Gladys for not getting rid of her and accepts that whatever she is now is because of her. However, as she says this, she also recalls all the times Gladys hurt her. Following that, Norma visits the doctor, who tells her that Gladys may never recover. She then nervously asks the doctor if it's genetic. Norma's afraid that she'll end up like her mother, and the doctor's surprised by her question and is at a loss for words. The next day, fearing that she might become abusive like her mother, Norma decides to get an abortion. However, halfway to the clinic, she has a change of heart and informs the driver, but the driver doesn't listen to her and takes her to the clinic regardless. Later in the operating room, Norma says she wants to leave, but the doctors sedate her and the baby is finally aborted. After this incident, Norma tries to move on and goes on a date with a famous ex-baseball player. During their date, he shares stories from his life that impress her. However, when the man asks about her breakthrough in the movie industry, it triggers painful memories of the times when she was exploited by the directors. Seeing Norma's distress, he holds her hand and says that he understands what it feels like to be alone. Norma then confesses that she no longer wants to be an actress and all she wants is a simple life with a good person. A few days later, Norma receives a confidential letter and, to her surprise, it's from her father. In the letter, he apologizes for all his past mistakes and promises to meet her in person very soon. Furthermore, he claims that he has an interview with her and is very excited to meet her. Norma clutches the letter to her heart and breaks down in tears. Months later, it's the premiere of Norma's biggest movie to date, and she gets out of the car and waves at her fans. Later, one of the paparazzi informs her that someone special will be waiting for her in her hotel room that night, so she assumes that it must be her father. Afterward, as the movie ends, the entire crowd gives her a standing ovation. However, Norma believes that the person on the screen is not her and feels guilty that she had to give up her baby for this. Following the premiere, Norma hurries to her hotel suite with high hopes of meeting her father. To her surprise, she finds her baseball star boyfriend waiting for her. The man approaches her and gets down on one knee to propose to her. He promises to take her away from all this and protect her from the predators hounding her. Though hesitant, Norma eventually says yes, and the two of them kiss each other. Not long after, the couple got married and started their life together. In the next scene, Norma's genuinely excited and shares her poems with her husband. However, he doesn't seem interested at all, which kinda hurts her feelings. One day, they go to meet his Italian family, and Norma's unfamiliar with their culture. As a result, his family mocks her with subtle gestures and laughs, making her feel humiliated. One day, Cass and Eddie meet Norma's husband and hand him an envelope containing naked photos they took of Norma in the old days. They laugh and advise him that these negatives should be kept secret because they might land in the hands of the wrong people. When he arrives home, the man gets furious about the images and immediately slaps Norma, asking her if she's just a piece of flesh. Norma immediately apologizes to him, and the baseball stud asks her to quit her new film. Norma claims that this is her life and she has to act even if she doesn't want to. In response, the man asks her to demand that she be given more serious roles, and Norma agrees and promises to do so. In the next scene, we see Norma on a movie set, once again portraying the typical role of a naive and dumb blonde. Towards the end, she jumps onto a subway and a gust of wind from below lifts her skirts, exposing her undergarments. The crowd cheers and congratulates her, taking many photos to remember the moment. However, in the background, her husband watches with anger and disapproval. After a tiring day, Norma returns home and calls out to her husband, but he suddenly attacks her. He degrades her and calls her all sorts of names while questioning if she's proud of herself. Norma pleads and weeps, explaining that she was coerced into the situation, but her husband doesn't listen to her. He just hits her and beats her up all night with his belt and whatever else he can find. A few days later, Norma receives another letter from her father. In the letter, he says that he couldn't bring himself to watch her new movie because the advertising had featured private parts of her body, and he didn't want to see his daughter in that light. He says he's feeling saddened by Norma's divorce from her husband, but he's relieved that there were no children to witness the painful separation. The scene then shifts to 1955 in New York, where a writer named Arthur Miller arrives at the theater for auditions of his new play. There, he's surprised to see Marilyn auditioning for the role of Magda. After her audition, there's a round of applause, and Arthur also cries at the end. Later, he talks with Norma, where Arthur tells her that Magda was his first love, who's no longer alive. Norma sympathizes with them and tells him she had some thoughts about Magda. The writer feels happy to know how much she cares and offers to listen. She then goes into detail about how she feels about Magda and talks about Magda's kindness. Afterward, Arthur becomes curious about Norma's personal interests and life beyond her public image. He asks if she has a name other than Marilyn, which makes her very happy. For the first time, someone's interested in learning more about her rather than just sleeping with her. The two begin laughing together, and he asks if he can call her his Magda, and Norma agrees. After this, Norma and Arthur start dating, and soon after, they have a very intimate wedding. Then they decide to live in a cozy house away from the hustle of the city. The couple take walks hand in hand and play on the beach together. Eventually, Norma becomes pregnant again, and she's very happy. She's thankful for their seemingly perfect life, and Arthur's also overjoyed to have a baby along the way. One day, Norma searches for Arthur around the house and eventually enters his study. She then looks at his writings, but's taken aback when she discovers his new creation, which is about her. She's distraught because Arthur had promised not to write about her, and he seems to have broken the promise so quickly. Norma's world feels like it's crashing down again, so she confronts Arthur. She pleads with him not to do this because she has no desire to return to being Marilyn again. Days later, some of Arthur's friends visit the couple and share that Norma is a genuinely kind and highly intellectual person. Arthur appreciates their praise and returns to the house. Inside, he finds Norma feeling anxious and asks why she's not coming to the beach with them. She says that his friends don't like her, but Arthur reassures her that she's overthinking it. Together, they decide to head to the beach, bringing snacks and beer for a relaxing day. However, all of a sudden, Norma falls to the ground and notices blood spreading across her dress. Unfortunately, it becomes clear that she's lost her baby once again. Despite her hopes for a different life, Norma's life doesn't change. She finds herself in the same spotlight, with people constantly pushing and grabbing at her wherever she goes. During one of her film scenes, Norma sings a beautiful song, but soon she realizes the song is filled with indirect jokes aimed at her. This causes her to lose her temper, and she screams at the director. He then takes her from the set and tries to calm her down with a sedative. Meanwhile, Arthur's also left wondering how he can help her because she's growing increasingly distant and self-destructive due to the drugs. One day, Norma receives a letter from her father expressing condolences for the loss of her child and says he'll contact her soon. Disturbed by the same stupid letter, and while under the influence of drugs, Norma gets into a car accident. Although she somehow manages to make it back home, she's in a confused and disoriented state to the point that she doesn't even recognize Arthur. Later, she receives a call from a film shoot asking if she can come that day, but Norma responds by cursing at them and then hides the phone away in a drawer. The scene then shifts to 1962, where Norma's drug addiction has escalated to the point where she relies on them to calm herself down. By this time, she's also divorced Arthur Miller. The tragic thing is that she still hasn't met her father, and all she's received are letters of fake consolations and false promises of meeting soon. One day, while on a plane, Norma becomes severely dizzy and throws up. When they arrive in New York, she struggles to stand up, and a stewardess comes to her aid. Outside, two men escort her to a car, and on the way, she tells them that there's nothing inappropriate between her and President Kennedy, and that their connection is purely a meeting of souls. The men then give her a return ticket to Los Angeles for that night, claiming that the president's plans have changed and he'll be unable to stay. Later, in a hotel, they practically drag her into a room where she changes and gets ready. After this, Norma goes to see President Kennedy, who's lying half naked and talking on the phone. She gets worried about his well-being and asks if there's anything she can do to make him feel better. But then he asks Norma to pleasure him while he continues to talk on the phone. After she's finished, Norma tells the president how wonderful he is and assures him that she doesn't care how many women he sleeps with. But before she can finish speaking, he grips her tightly and becomes intimate with her. In the end, Norma passes out once again, intoxicated and under the influence of drugs. The president then leaves her in that condition, and the guards drag her away. In the following days, Norma's mental state continues to deteriorate, and she experiences more and more hallucinations. One day, she begins to feel that she's pregnant again when she touches her breasts. At night, she has a disturbing dream in which she finds herself back in the operating room, undergoing an abortion similar to the first time. Although Norma reassures herself that it's just a dream, when she wakes up, her body's covered in blood. Meanwhile, her phone constantly rings, but she rarely answers it anymore. Her father also keeps sending her letters, and in one of them, he tells Norma that he wants to see her, but the guilt is too much for him. One day, Norma receives a call from Eddie and is informed that Cass has tragically passed away from choking on his own vomit. Eddie sobs on the phone and informs her that Cass left a memento for her. Norma cries as well and says she doesn't want it, but Eddie insists that he'll send it to her by delivery. The next day, Norma receives a parcel at her home. She's really nervous as she takes it inside her house. Upon opening it, she finds a toy tiger, much like the one she had as a child. Norma then tightly embraces the doll and begins to cry. Beneath the toy, she discovers a letter, and when she reads it, it shocks her to the core. It turns out that all these years, it was Cass who was writing those letters, pretending to be her father. In reality, her father had never made contact, and he's not even aware of her existence. Faced with this painful truth, Norma rushes outside and starts screaming in pain. To calm herself down, she takes a large amount of pills and drinks alcohol. In the final scene, Norma lies in her bed and tries to pick up the phone to call someone, but she's unable